I, 32F, am at my breaking point with my in-laws and need to know if I was completely out of line or if I was justified in what I said. My husband Mark, 34M, and I have been married for 4 years. We bought our house 3 years ago, and it's honestly our dream home. We saved for years to afford it, and we're both really proud of what we've accomplished. Mark's parents live about 8 hours away. His mom Janet, 58F, and dad Doug, 61M, are a lot. They're very traditional and have strong opinions about everything. They've never really liked me because I'm not the type of wife they wanted for their son. I work full-time in marketing. I'm not particularly domestic, and I don't want kids right now, maybe not ever. 2 weeks ago, Janet called Mark crying because their air conditioning broke and it was going to be a week before anyone could fix it. It's been brutally hot where they live, so Mark immediately offered for them to come stay with us until it was fixed. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I agreed because it seemed like the right thing to do. Mark promised it would just be a few days and that he'd handle any issues that came up. Well, it's been 2 weeks now. The AC was fixed after 5 days, but Janet keeps finding excuses to extend their stay. First it was, we want to spend more time with you. Then it was, the heat wave isn't over yet. And now it's, we're thinking of looking at houses in your area. That last one was news to me and Mark, by the way. But the real problem isn't how long they're staying, it's how they're acting while they're here. From day one, Janet has been rearranging my kitchen to be more efficient. She's moved all my dishes around, reorganized my pantry, and even threw away some of my food because she said it was unhealthy junk. She's also been doing laundry constantly and has taken over my laundry room completely. When I tried to do a load of my own clothes, she told me I was doing it wrong and rewashed everything. Doug has been just as bad. He's changed the thermostat settings without asking, moved furniture around in the living room for better traffic flow, and has been leaving his tools and projects scattered around my garage. The worst part is how they treat me in my own home. Janet makes comments about everything, my cooking, my cleaning, how I dress, how I spend my free time. She's made it clear that she thinks I'm a terrible wife because I don't have dinner ready when Mark gets home, even though I get home from work later than he does. Yesterday, she told me I should quit my job because Mark makes enough money, and I should focus on taking care of the home properly. Doug constantly corrects me about things in my own house. When I mentioned that we need to replace the fence in the backyard, he told me I was wrong, and that it was fine. When I was watering my garden, he told me I was using too much water and took the hose away from me. They both act like I'm a guest in my own home, while they're the rightful owners. Mark has been completely useless throughout all of this. Every time I try to talk to him about his parents' behavior, he says they're just trying to help and that I should try to get along with them. He keeps making excuses for them and telling me to pick my battles. The final straw came yesterday evening. I came home from work exhausted and just wanted to relax on my couch and watch TV. Janet was in the kitchen cooking dinner, without asking what I wanted or if I even wanted her to cook, and Doug was in the living room watching some military documentary with the volume cranked up. I asked Doug if I could watch something else since it was my house and my TV. He looked at me like I'd asked him to murder someone and said, "We were here first. You can watch your shows later." I lost it. I told Doug that this was my house, not his, and that if he didn't like my rules about being considerate to the people who actually live here, he could pack his bags and find somewhere else to stay. I said I was tired of being treated like a stranger in my own home and that I didn't care if their feelings were hurt. Janet came running in from the kitchen and started crying, saying I was being cruel and ungrateful after everything they'd done for us. I told her that I never asked her to reorganize my entire house and that throwing away my food wasn't helping. It was disrespectful. Mark came home in the middle of this and immediately started yelling at me for attacking his parents. He said I was being a terrible host and that his parents were just trying to make themselves comfortable. I told Mark that there's a difference between being comfortable and taking over someone's home, and that if he couldn't see how disrespectful his parents were being, then maybe he should go stay somewhere else with them. Janet and Doug packed up and left that night to stay at a hotel. Mark went with them and hasn't come home since. He's been texting me saying I owe his parents an apology and that I was completely out of line. His whole family is now involved. His sister called me to say, I'm a horrible person for throwing elderly people out of my house. They're not elderly. They're in their late 50s and early 60s. His brother texted Mark saying I'm obviously not family material if I can't handle a little inconvenience. I'm getting messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins telling me I should be ashamed of myself and that I need to apologize immediately. But honestly, I don't feel sorry. I feel relieved that they're gone. My house feels like mine again, and I can actually relax in my own living room. My friends are split. Some say I was totally justified and that Mark's parents were way out of line. Others think I should have handled it more diplomatically and that I was harsh for essentially kicking them out. My sister thinks I should apologize just to keep the peace, but my mom says she would have done the same thing in my position. I'm starting to question myself because everyone in Mark's family is acting like I committed some unforgivable sin. Maybe I was too harsh? Maybe I should have tried talking to them more directly before exploding. But at the same time, I feel like I tried to be patient and accommodating, and they just kept pushing boundaries. And Mark was no help whatsoever. He completely failed to support me or address his parents' behavior. So, AITA for telling my in-laws they could get out if they didn't like my rules? Should I apologize to keep my marriage intact? Or was I right to stand up for myself in my own home? Update 2 days later. I wasn't planning to update so soon, but a lot has happened and I wanted to address some of the questions people had. First, thank you to everyone who responded. The overwhelming majority of you said I was NTA, which honestly made me feel a lot better about my reaction. I was starting to second-guess myself with all the pressure from Mark's family. A few people asked about the timeline and whether I'd tried to address the issues before exploding. I realized I wasn't totally clear about this in my original post. I did try to handle things diplomatically at first. On day 3, I politely asked Janet if she could check with me before rearranging my kitchen, and she laughed and said she was just making it better. When I found out she'd thrown away my food, I told her I'd prefer if she asked before throwing anything away, and she said she was just cleaning out the junk. I asked Doug twice to please ask before adjusting the thermostat because we have specific settings for our electric bill. Both times he said, okay, and then did it again the next day. The problem was that every time I tried to address something directly, they'd act like I was being unreasonable or they'd ignore what I said completely. And Mark kept telling me to let it go whenever I brought up their behavior. Several people also asked about Mark's reaction and whether this was typical behavior for him. That's actually what's been bothering me the most since this happened. Mark and I usually communicate pretty well, and he's normally supportive when I'm dealing with difficult people. But when it comes to his parents, he turns into a completely different person. He becomes defensive and acts like any criticism of them is a personal attack on him. This isn't the first time his parents have been problematic, but it's the first time they've stayed in our house for an extended period. Usually we see them for a few days at holidays, and I can handle their comments and behavior for short periods. But having them in my home, changing my living space, and treating me like I was the guest was a completely different level of disrespect. Anyway, here's what's happened since my post. Mark came home yesterday morning while I was getting ready for work. He looked like he hadn't slept much, and he was clearly upset. He started by saying that his parents were hurt and confused by my behavior, and that they'd been crying about it. I told Mark that I was sorry his parents were upset, but that I wasn't going to apologize for standing up for myself in my own home. I said that their behavior had been completely inappropriate, and that he should have dealt with it instead of making me the bad guy for finally reaching my limit. Mark said I was being dramatic and that his parents were just trying to help. He said they were from a different generation, and that I should have been more patient with them. I asked Mark if he thought it was okay for his mother to throw away my food and completely reorganize my kitchen without asking. He said she was just trying to make things more efficient. I asked if he thought it was okay for his father to take the hose away from me while I was watering my garden and tell me I was doing it wrong. He said his dad knows about yard work and was just giving advice. Asked if he thought it was okay for his father to refuse to let me watch TV in my own living room. Mark said his dad had been watching his show first, and I should have been more considerate. That's when I realized that Mark genuinely doesn't see anything wrong with his parents' behavior. In his mind, I'm the problem for not being grateful enough for their help and accommodating enough for their preferences. I told Mark that if he couldn't see how disrespectful his parents had been, then we had a much bigger problem than I thought. I said that I felt like he'd chosen his parents over his wife, and that I was questioning whether he was capable of putting our marriage first. Mark got defensive and said I was being manipulative by making him choose between his parents and me. He said that wasn't fair, and that I should be able to get along with his family. I told him that getting along was different from being disrespected, and walked over in my own home. I said that his parents hadn't been guests, they'd been occupiers. We ended up having a huge fight where Mark accused me of being selfish and difficult, and I accused him of being spineless and unsupportive. He left for work angry, and we haven't really talked since, but the bigger issue came up last night. Mark came home and said his parents wanted to have a family meeting to clear the air and work things out. He said they were willing to come back and stay with us again if we could all just sit down and communicate better. I told Mark absolutely not. I said that his parents were welcome to visit during the day, but they were not staying in my house again. I said that they'd proven they couldn't respect my home or my boundaries, and that I wasn't willing to go through that again. Mark said I was being unreasonable and that his parents had learned their lesson and would be more respectful. I said that even if that were true, which I doubt, the damage was already done, and I didn't trust them to follow through. Mark then dropped the bomb that his parents were seriously considering moving to our area to be closer to us. He said they'd been talking about it for a while, and that our conflict had made them realize how much they wanted to be part of our daily lives. I told Mark that if his parents moved here, he needed to set very clear boundaries about our home and our marriage. I said that I wouldn't tolerate them dropping by unannounced or treating our house like their second home. Mark said I was being controlling and that families should be able to visit whenever they want. He said that when his parents move here, they'll probably need to stay with us sometimes while they're house hunting, and I need to be okay with that. I told Mark that I would not be okay with that and that if he couldn't support me on this boundary, then we needed to seriously reconsider our relationship. We're basically at an impasse right now. Mark thinks I'm being unreasonable and destroying his family relationships. I think Mark is failing to protect our marriage and choosing his parents' feelings over mine. I'm honestly not sure where we go from here. Several people suggested marriage counseling in the comments, and I think that might be our only option if we want to save this relationship. But I'm also starting to wonder if this is just who Mark is when it comes to his family and whether I can live with that long term. Thanks again for all the support. It's helped me feel more confident that I wasn't crazy for standing up for myself, even if it's created bigger problems in my marriage. Update 2 to 1 week later. This will probably be my final update because the situation has essentially resolved itself, though not in the way I was hoping. After my last post, several people messaged me with advice about marriage counseling and setting boundaries. I decided to try one more serious conversation with Mark before making any major decisions about our relationship. I waited until the weekend when we both had time to really talk without work distractions. I told Mark that I wanted to have an honest conversation about our marriage and our future, and that I needed him to really listen to what I was saying. I explained that my issue wasn't just with his parents' behavior, it was with his complete lack of support for me as his wife. I told him that I felt like he'd thrown me under the bus to avoid conflict with his family, and that I couldn't live in a marriage where I always came second to his parents' feelings. Mark listened, but his response made it clear that we're just not compatible when it comes to family stuff. He said that his parents raised him and sacrificed for him, and that he owed them respect and accommodation. He said that I knew his family was important to him when I married him, and that I should have expected them to be a major part of our lives. I told Mark that there was a difference between including family in your life and letting them run your life. I said that his parents had been disrespectful and boundary crossing, and that he should have dealt with that instead of making excuses for them. Mark said that I was being too sensitive and that his parents' behavior wasn't that bad. He said that they were old-fashioned but meant well, and that I should appreciate their efforts to help rather than focusing on the negative. That's when I realized that Mark and I will never see eye to eye on this issue. In his mind, his parents can do no wrong, and any problems are because I'm not trying hard enough to get along with them. I told Mark that I thought we should try marriage counseling to see if we could work through our different perspectives. He said that he didn't think we needed counseling. He thought I just needed to adjust my attitude about his family. He also told me that his parents had found a house they liked in our area and were planning to put in an offer. He said they were excited about being closer to us and that they'd probably want to have dinner with us a few times a week once they moved. I asked Mark if he discussed any boundaries with his parents about their future involvement in our lives. He said he didn't think boundaries were necessary because we're all adults and could figure things out as we go. That conversation made it clear to me that Mark wasn't going to change his approach to his family and that I was going to be dealing with boundary issues for the rest of our marriage. Over the next few days, I did a lot of thinking about what I wanted my life to look like. Did I want to spend the next 30 years fighting with my in-laws and feeling unsupported by my husband? Did I want to live in a marriage where my comfort and feelings were always secondary to keeping his parent happy? The answer was no. I talked to a lawyer on Thursday to understand my options for divorce. I also started looking at apartments in case I needed to move out quickly. On Friday night, I told Mark that I wanted a divorce. He was completely shocked. He said he thought we were just going through a rough patch and that I was being dramatic about the situation with his parents. He said that lots of couples have issues with in-laws and that it wasn't worth ending a marriage over. I told Mark that this wasn't just about his parents. It was about his complete inability to support me or put our marriage first when it conflicted with his family's wants. I said that I'd realized we had totally different values about marriage and family and that I didn't think we could work through that. Mark begged me to reconsider and said he'd try to set better boundaries with his parents. But honestly, it felt too little too late. I'd already seen how he handled conflict between me and his family, and I didn't believe he'd actually follow through on any promises he made. I moved out yesterday, and I'm staying with my sister while I look for my own place. Mark is devastated and has been calling and texting constantly, but I think this is the right decision for both of us. I deserve to be with someone who will put our relationship first when it matters, and Mark deserves to be with someone who's more okay with his approach to family dynamics. His parents called me yesterday to tell me that I'm destroying their son and that I'm selfish and immature. They said that if I just tried harder to get along with them, none of this would have happened. That conversation actually confirmed that I'm making the right choice. These people will never see me as anything other than an obstacle to their relationship with their son, and Mark will never be able to stand up to them on my behalf. I'm sad that my marriage is ending, but I'm also relieved. I feel like I can breathe again, and I'm looking forward to building a life where I don't have to constantly defend my right to be respected in my own home. For anyone dealing with similar in-law issues, trust your gut. If your partner consistently chooses their family over you and makes excuses for disrespectful behavior, it's not going to get better. You deserve to be with someone who will stand up for you and put your relationship first. Thanks to everyone who supported me through this. Your responses helped me realize that I wasn't being unreasonable or dramatic. I was just standing up for myself in a situation where no one else would.